President Trump's national security strategy is one of the security strategies of all time. But not only does it reflect the administration's bizarre priorities, it actually doesn't even hold together as a document at all. We're going to talk about all the contradictions literally baked in to a 25-page effort to make it look like there's a single cohesive strategy driving the White House. And we're going to contrast it, of course, with the Biden administration's national security strategy, which has some flaws of its own. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so I've got pulled up here both the Biden-Harris 2022 national security strategy and the Trump national security strategy. And on the literal front page, they look kind of the same, right? Trump strategy, 33 pages, has a nice, very official Cold War era vibe. And here is the national security strategy, right, of the Biden administration. You can see a very, nice looking, wholesome, looks like looks like it was designed by some corporate branding. Okay. But that's where the contrast starts. Now I want to just don't read it. Just scroll through and get a sense of kind of how this is written. Big font, right? Weird formatting choices here, right? Indentation, line spacing is a little weird. But you could see they love bullet points. Dude, they love bullet points. Okay? Lots and lots of bullet points here. Very simple. Clear language. Almost looks like maybe an undergraduate textbook. In fact, a really heavy use of bullet points. Now, contrast this with Biden-Harris. This looks like something you would submit in grad school. You can see there is a very nice table of contents. The formatting is very slick, contains some quotes, and of course, there is almost no bullet points. It's a real lengthy strategy document, something that looks more like an academic work, like a treaty or a book. This looks like something you would get in the nonfiction section, okay? And this right there is the first contrast. You can see who is coming from an academic background and who is coming here dropping some bullet points. When we look at the actual table of contents, right, there's some really other interesting things. The first is, of course, that the table of contents is unbelievably simple, just a few really bullet points, whereas this has a sprawling table of contents. But when we look at the content, you see that actually this tells us a lot about the content that's going on here. And right here, I want to point out that part 3 are global priorities, right? This is what I want to really take a look at because each document lays out what it views as the U.S.'s vital national security interests. Now, before you say, hey, these documents are about the same length, in terms of word count, very different, right? But being verbose isn't the same thing as being smart. We all have a friend who proves that. But what I want to point out is that within the Trump administration's national security document, there's absolutely a ton of absolute fluff. One, that entire page is dedicated to what is a strategy. Literally, a strategy, in quotations, it tells us, is a concrete, realistic plan that explains the essential connection between ends and means, right? Now, it's clear that they didn't actually read the previous administration strategy documents before they criticized it, because they say American strategies since the Cold War have fallen short. They've been laundry lists of wishes or desired end states, but don't have clearly defined what we want. Instead, vague platitudes and often misjudged what we should want. Right? And this is actually kind of a valid criticism that the U.S. simply ended up as the global police, doing everything everywhere and unable to set priorities. And I think that's actually the most salient criticism against this one. But you can see in the table of contents that a lot of ink is spilled on each section. But think about it for a minute. Even if the U.S. dedicates 2% of its national security apparatus efforts to a place like Africa, that's still more than most other countries on planet Earth devote to the continent. So it would kind of make sense that there would at least be some ink spilled for it. And the idea of saying, hey, there was never really any prioritization, there was never really any sense of scale, reflects the fact that they clearly didn't even read this, because literally the global priorities is a section. And if you say, well, they never really set what their priorities were, bro, they don't even number it. They say part 3 are global priorities. Outcompeting China, and constraining Russia. That's it. And then they say, listen, we should work together to try to deal with some other stuff. We can work together on climate and energy security, pandemics and biodefense, food insecurity, arms control and non-proliferation, and fighting terrorism. Okay. I want to point out, oh yeah, and they stick in here, we should also try to combat transnational organized crime. I think this is fascinating, right? And they also say, interestingly enough, which I think is pretty good, hey, we want to try to be the people who shape the norms around development and use of emerging technologies like AI, cyberspace, and trade, right? And all of this is nice, right? But to say that there was no priority setting is kind of a joke. They couldn't make it more obvious that there is a national priority, and the national priorities are China and Russia, which makes sense. These are two in the world. These are the two largest mobilizable militaries that aren't a U.S. ally, and yeah, they've also been explicitly hostile to the United States. Now, there's more ink wasted here. You can see that actually there's even more ink throughout the document that spends time glazing President Trump, which I think is hysterical because, one, you don't write a strategy after you've executed it, right? It's like planning for a mission after you've returned from the mission. Yet somehow this document spends a ton of time just absolutely fucking just glazing President Trump. I mean, really, it should be banned in some states. That's how hard these guys are. Never mind. But the takeaway is they try to lay out, hey, what are our priorities, right? And it says, what are America's core foreign policy interests? What do we want in and from the world? And this, I think, is the most fascinating thing, right? So again, accusing the previous administration of not having things they want to achieve, well, clearly these guys didn't read it because they just described things they want to achieve. They say, okay, well, what does the U.S. want? And this is this is the most fascinating part, okay? This is literally fascinating. Top bullet point. The U.S. just wants a reasonably stable Western Hemisphere, well-governed enough to prevent and discourage mass migration to the United States. That's it. And we want their governments to work with us to do things. And we want to make sure we can access their natural resources. Then they say, listen, we don't want foreign actors to damage the U.S. economy and keep the Indo-Pacific free and open, preserving freedom of navigation and reliable supply chains and access to critical materials. Right? Fascinating. We want to support our allies in preserving the freedom and security of Europe while restoring Europe's civilizational self-confidence and Western identity. This second part is fucking weird, okay? You notice that there is absolutely nothing in the 2022 document about changing the fundamental characteristics of any of these rival countries. Nowhere in here do we say that we want to see China become more democratic and free. They just don't. They just say, listen, we have differences with the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. That's it. They're like, listen, we don't want to change you. We just don't want you to win. Same with Russia. They say, listen, the government's pursued an imperialist foreign policy. And they've tried to destabilize our government. And they say, listen, we've made multiple efforts to reach out to Russia to limit our rivalry and identify pragmatic areas of cooperation. President Putin told us to go fuck ourselves, and now we view the Russian government as a threat to security in Europe. That's it. So this idea that only so Biden and Harris explicitly were like, listen, we don't change governments. That's a disaster. But they say, we want to change one kind of government, which is Europe. And we want to orient them towards what they call civilizational self-confidence and Western identity. This is fucking crazy, okay? And it's crazy because literally the Trump White House in one breath is like, we don't do interventions in countries where we don't have strategic interests. Guys, we don't have... What? Except it for Western Europe? This is... What? This is insane. Then they say we want to present an adversarial power. This is code for Iran, but somehow we don't say that. From dominating the Middle East, its oil and gas supplies and choke points through which they pass, while avoiding forever wars that bogged us down in the region at great cost. Then they say we want to ensure U.S. technology and U.S. standards in AI, biotech, quantum computing drive the world forward. Right? They say this is vital core national interest. Again, this doesn't really. You got to walk me. You got to dog walk me here from Europe's civilizational self-confidence and Western identity to being a vital core national interest. Okay. And one, I also want to point out. So fundamentally, what this describes is not a global power, right? The Biden-Harris document describes a national defense strategy of a global power, the flagship economy representing all democracies, all human rights, right? And that's a big responsibility. And it requires looking everywhere. It requires focusing on all kinds of stuff. This is what it means to be a global power. This is the national defense strategy of a global power. This is a regional player. And it's not my words. This is what they say they are. Number one priority is just our hemisphere, okay? Just South and Central America, right? And of course, all they say is, listen, we just want to make sure we can continue to trade in the Indo-Pacific. And good luck, Europe. We support you, but also we really need to fundamentally reshape your culture, which is weird. And in the U.S., in the Middle East, we just want to keep Iran from dominating. Sure, fair enough. And we want U.S. technology to be the global standard. This is kind of weird, right? This is kind of weird because, again, this is so far removed from a global power. And a lot of these things, the insane part is that if you really think about them, these require like this scale of strategic thinking, okay? And so the whole thing, though, this document within itself, the Trump document, is just full of insane contradictions, right? So again, we just talked about the fact that changing European civilization or whatever is like a big priority. There we go. And really, I want to try to find more of this. One, I want to see this. Promoting European greatness. This is insane. Europe's real problems are even deeper than military spending. Continental Europe is, losing its economic dominance. Sure. There's a civilizational erasure. Basically, they're saying that there's too many European immigrants, and they're not going to preserve like European Western culture. Transnational bodies undermine political liberty, migration policies. Listen, all of these things are internal documents, internal political decisions of the Europeans, right? You don't have to like Europe's migration policy. You don't have to like China's migration policy. You don't have to like Kazakhstan's migration policy, right? But it doesn't matter because unless that is your national security priority, going inside their country and transforming it, right? They say the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. Not a U.S. strategic problem. Like, I'm sorry, it's not. If European voters want it to look a certain way or they like migration laws a certain way in their democracies, that's fine. If that's what their governments want, right? Now, it's funny because it says European allies enjoy a hard power advantage over Russia by almost every measure, save nuclear weapons, right? And it's like European relations with Russia are deeply attenuated, and many Europeans regard Russia as an existential threat. We want to restore strategic stability across the Eurasian landmass, Eurasian being a term used almost exclusively by Russia, and mitigate the risk of conflict between Russia and European states, which is insane because literally Russia and European states are actively in conflict, which is just insane. It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, which is wild because literally they listed their core national interests up here and it did not appear. So like, which is it, guys? Is it a core national interest to have peace in Ukraine or is it not? And I don't know, like, and it says the Ukraine war has increased Europe's external dependencies, and then they cite German chemical companies are building in China. Okay, I don't know if that's definitely not the case. Russia is sanctioned. The European economies have largely learned to function with much less Russian economic ties. Then it says Europe's strategically vital. Is it or not, dude? This document doesn't make any sense. It's almost like a bunch of people got assigned to write different sections, and then they didn't actually check to see if it made sense. Now, so again, they're like, okay, like, they're like, our broad policy Europe. Okay, strategic stability with Russia. Guys, if Russia gets rewarded for winning, for taking over Ukraine, you're not going to have more stability. Reestablishing conditions of stability, which is a noble goal, and I think one of the Europeans share, it's not going to happen without a Russian defeat on some level in Ukraine, or at least denying of Russian victory in Ukraine. It says cultivating resistance to your current trajectory within European nations, which is insane. It implies that the strategic goal of the United States is to actually subvert European culture and politics. Preposterous. Ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance, which appears nowhere else in the document, by the way. Again, this is suddenly a huge, like, thing. It's insane, right? Also insane. They say, listen, United States problem of the world is over. We want to see NATO countries spend 5% on GDP, which is like almost double what the United States spends on defense. Okay. When you look for European countries that actually spend that 5%, the answer is none of them. The United States, we, the global superpower, we spend 3.4% GDP of our GDP on defense, which puts us between Greece and Uzbekistan. Okay. We are incredibly wealthy. We are not spending out the ass, not by any stretch of the imagination. Cuba spends 2.9%, right? I mean, you can see that, yeah, some Europeans are way underspending, but like Estonia is at 2.9%, Serbia at 2.9%, right? The criticism is there. But when you talk about 5%, guys, you're talking about Israel, a country actively at war, spends 5.3%, okay? So they're like, yeah, we want you Europeans to spend way more than us. And they're like, oh, oh my God, this kills me. Over the long term, it's more than plausible that in a few decades at least, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. They mean racially. By definition, like, it's fine. It is open question whether they view their place in the world or their alliance with the United States in the same way as those who signed the NATO Charter. Well, we just said America doesn't view its role the same way. It just says that. It just said that the NATO Charter says anyone can apply for membership. But like, this doesn't make any sense, guys. This is literally insane. And like, it's just so funny. Also, some of the parts where they glaze President Trump, the president of peace, in addition to his remarkable achievement, leveraged deal making to secure unprecedented peace in 8 conflicts, 7 now, by the way. But it also is like, U.S. policy will be realistic about what is possible in dealings with other nations, good relations. There is nothing inconsistent of acting in accordance to a realistic assessment, taking good relations with countries whose governing systems and societies differ from ours, even as we push like-minded friends to uphold our shared norms, furthering interests as we do. This is, again, so contradictory. They're like, okay, we're going to push Europe to change fundamental parts of their governance system because we don't like it, but also we want to respect other countries that have different governance systems and cultures, and we're unbothered by the fact that they're so different. Also, there's a bunch of other shit, like the era of mass migration is over. What? Guys, listen. The United States, if you think they're admitting too many migrants, you just change asylum law. That's it. That's all you do. You just change asylum law. You pass an act of Congress. It's a domestic issue. Just like during COVID, everybody closed the border. They said, listen, no, there's no asylum cases being processed because U.S. law says during a public health emergency, we can suspend asylum applications. You just pass a law that says that. That's it. It's not a national security issue. I'm sorry. It's just not. It's a national security issue. Like, if you have like foreign intelligence agencies entering the country, sure, fine. But this idea that it's like a massive fucking whole of government effort is a total fucking lie. And it's really exhausting to, again, see this sort of thing. Anyway, listen, the takeaway from this, guys, if there is one, Russia fucking loves it because the U.S. says we are now a regional power. And Russia says, listen, great, we want to be a European regional power. We want to be the dominant power in Europe. And the United States, you get to be the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. And the U.S. says, listen, China, you get to be the dominant power in the Indo-Pacific, right? So fundamentally, these are the differences. In this one, the U.S. is a global superpower. And in this one, the U.S. is a regional power with narrow-ranging interests. And as we've pointed out, those interests, if you take them to their logical conclusion, if you want to actually secure it, you're going to have to compete with the other global superpowers. You're going to have to compete with China. But this is undergrad level shit. This is undergrad level shit. This is grad school shit, okay? That's the bottom line here. Anyway, guys, if you want to help out the Ukrainians, smoke the Russians, if you think the Russians are actually, a threat, help out Ukraine Aid Ops. This is a U.S. 501c3, tax deductible, baby. And we're raising funds for some of Ukraine's best units, 3rd Assault, 54th Reconnaissance, 7th Rapid Response Corps of the EU, and the 73rd, the Navy SEALs of Ukraine. We're buying them not just the stuff they need to make it through the winter. Drones, power stations, dude, in the cold, power banks, power stations, they don't run nearly as well, nearly as efficiency, right? And we're buying their R&D lab some stuff so they can get some new toys to the front line that is ready for combat service. So make a donation. Huge thank you to guys like Francois, right? Helping develop ways to alleviate the Kazakh nightmare that is today's battlefield. Mike Rizkov, Russia must never be allowed to win. Ivandro, dropping some real. Brazil stands with Ukraine. Fuck yeah. And $31 from Jacob. Thank you guys all so much. You guys are awesome. Anyway, huge thank you to the Colonel Tier members of Combat Vet News as well. Sergey Jasenko, Thomas Anderson, William Alexander, Georgiev, L90, and all of our Lieutenant Tier members. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.